What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 14 fantasy wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup, so make sure to tune in. And if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us as the week progresses and sending us your questions on there as well. We'll make sure to answer them. And also, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. Sign up for our free newsletter to get access to exclusive content. All the details in the description. But for now, let's get right into it. Before getting into our breakdowns, I want to give you guys a quick word from our sponsors at Overlay Fantasy Sports, who are taking DFS to a whole nother level. And I specifically want to highlight their matchup shop function, which is an absolute blast. In fact, we've been using it since the start of the NFL season because, let's face it, betting on the same old Team A versus Team B can get a little bit stale, a little bit boring. Well, that's not even close to being the case with the matchup shop of Overlay Fantasy, as it allows you to bet on individual player matchups, and it's super simple. Just pick whichever player you think will have the higher fantasy performance. And just like a regular bet would work, check out the spreads, do your research, and then win some money. You can bet on pretty much any single sport that you want, whether it's NFL, golf, MLB, etc. All those options are there. And again, super simple. Pretty much for any single NFL game coming up, you've got a bunch of different matchups that are always updated and added to. So if it's something as simple as just putting a single submission, you can do that. But guess what? If you want to get a parlay going and double up some of those winnings, you can do that as well. So take advantage of this. All of that homework you're doing for your fantasy lineups, let's have that translate to some big time winnings for your wallet as well. So do yourself a favor and check out Overlay Fantasy's matchup shop now. Looking at our first game of the week, we have got the New England Patriots at the LA Rams. And as far as wide receivers are concerned, we're mainly focusing on the LA side of things with the duo of Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. I would say normally these guys are high-end wide receiver twos any given week, especially in PPR scoring, but versus a tricky Patriots defense that can be stingy, and sure, they are inconsistent, but they generally do a good job of taking your top pieces, which Woods and Kupp definitely fall in that category. It's better to be a bit more conservative, so I'm viewing them as low to mid-level wide receiver twos. Definitely still worth a start and the best options you have in this game, but just temper those expectations a tad bit. And speaking of the other options, Jacoby Myers, Damiere Byrd, and N'Keal Harry all sits in our eyes. This Rams defense, very stingy bunch, and they have got shut down players pretty much at all levels. And when you on top of this, consider how anemic the Patriots' passing attack has been, this becomes too big of a risk for me. I'm fading all these guys. If you were really desperate and have to start one of them, it would be Myers, in my opinion, because he is just getting the most amount of targets. But again, probably best case scenario is a wide receiver 3 for Myers, and then Josh Reynolds a sit for the Rams. Again, I don't want to get too cute here. Woods and Kupp the main options. Reynolds afterwards a fade. Then we've got the Titans at the Jaguars. I will start both A.J. Brown and Corey Davis for the Titans. This is an extremely friendly matchup versus this awful Jaguars defense. Now, Corey Davis is coming off a huge game, but I would say, again, temper your expectations. Don't expect those big points yet, again, because A.J. Brown will get more involved. And more so importantly, Derrick Henry will have a huge game here versus the Jaguars. So to some extent, the Brown and Davis duo will be a little bit limited just because I anticipate the Titans to focus on the rushing attack. But either way, they both have some nice upside. I like the touchdown upside for A.J. Brown more so. To me, they are both in that mid-level wide receiver 2 range, more so in standard scoring. Then for the Jaguars, look, this Titans defense is beatable, and I expect the Jaguars having to air it out. DJ Shark and Colin Johnson, the two guys that I would be looking at. Johnson, a little bit more of a flyer, but he's been getting it done these last couple of weeks. I'd probably put them both at best case scenario, low-end wide receiver 2s, because, again, there are question marks at the quarterback position. And afterwards, fading Adam Humphries. Everything we said about Brown and Corey Davis, you can pretty much say the same, even more so for Humphries. And he is just so down the pecking order that I'm fading him. And then same with Laviska Shenault. Too many question marks at that quarterback position. So no thank you to that third, right now, what it looks like wide receiver option on the offense. Afterwards, we've got the Vikings at the Bucs. And I really like this matchup as far as wide receivers are concerned, specifically on the Bucs side of things. But with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, they have the much tougher matchup, and I anticipate the Vikings will have to throw here a bunch, potentially abandoning the rushing attack to keep pace. So, you like that volume, you like that upside, but again, I would probably view these guys as mid-level wide receiver twos at best, just because I think the Buccaneers could blow out the Vikings here, and they have the much better matchups. I love Godwin. I like Evans, Antonio Brown as well. To me, all these guys are high-end wide receiver twos. It might sound crazy, but this Vikings defense has been getting burnt all season long, and if you guys are an Antonio Brown owner, this could finally be the week where he just really blows up, puts up a classic AB type of game. It would not shock me one bit. But either way, I love the trio for the Bucs here. I would start them all, no questions asked. Thielen and Justin Jefferson, I think they're at this point, must starts as well, but I am lower on them this week. Then we've got the Chiefs at the Dolphins. Really only two names here that I'm focusing on, and that's the case every single week for the Chiefs and Dolphins, funny enough. For Kansas City, it's Tyreek Hill. That's pretty obvious. All the other guys on this offense are too inconsistent. Then for Miami, Devontae Parker. Maybe if Ryan Fitzpatrick was under center, I would be considering someone like a Jakeem Grant, who I did want to mention. But with Tua under center, to me, he is a sit. Yes, he saw some action this last week, and in my opinion, he is the number 2 wide receiver behind Devontae Parker. But again, with Tua under center, that really limits the scoring upside of this offense as opposed to if it was Ryan Fitzpatrick. And then for the Chiefs, Sammy Watkins, kind of returned last week, but I wouldn't get my hopes up. He has been rather inconsistent. This offense still goes through Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, so I'm fading Watkins. Then we've got the Broncos at the Panthers. This is a little bit tricky here from the Broncos side of things. I'm looking at Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy. If you guys need a flyer, those are the two guys I would be looking at. But this will probably be a situation where the Broncos more so focus on the rushing attack, knowing the struggles the Panthers have had defending the rush. So it really does limit the upside of both Patrick and Jeudy. Jeudy is coming off a very poor performance, but I do think the Broncos will try and get him more involved. I see both these guys probably as high-end wide receiver threes at best. I prefer going with Patrick above Jeudy just because he has been more consistent. But here for the Panthers, this is where I would more so be focusing my efforts on. Robbie Anderson is a great play because he has been pretty much since the start of the season the wide receiver 1 for the Panthers. But now DJ Moore, obviously you don't see his name here. That's with good reason. He is on the COVID IR list, so he will not be playing in this game unless something drastic happens. And that means Curtis Samuel is a viable start. Now the Panthers are also worth mentioning, supposed to get Christian McCaffrey back. We'll see if that's the case or if he has a setback. If he does, then you kind of devalue Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel just because Christian McCaffrey is such a huge part of that offense. But if he does miss that game, then you go in the reverse direction. Anderson and Curtis Samuel become even more viable. I view them as mid-level wide receiver 2s on the week. And then KJ Hamler, kind of that third man out, has been the case pretty much all season long, so I would not play him versus the Panthers. Afterwards, we got the Texans at the Bears. Brandon Cooks and Kiki Kuti are the two guys that I am considering. Brandon Cooks cleared the concussion procedure, so he will likely be playing in this game. But we were wondering who would step up after the suspension of Will Fuller. Well, it was Kiki Kuti mainly. Also, another name worth mentioning, Chad Henson had a big game last week, but a bit of that production also came during the span where Cooks was out. So let's keep that in mind. And again, I don't want to get too aggressive here from the Texans side of things facing this Bears defense. So I would mainly look at Cooks and QT as solid mid-level wide receiver 2s. And then the Bears, Allen Robinson, he is the wide receiver that you want in this matchup. High-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 in PPR scoring versus this very bad Texans defense. And most times you would be considering other wide receivers like Miller and Mooney because of the matchup, but because of the situation at quarterback for the Bears, unfortunately those guys are fades, and same with Chad Henson, just because, again, with Cooks healthy and versus this great Bears defense, I would rather fade him. Then we've got the Cardinals at the Giants. The best start here is DeAndre Hopkins for the Cardinals. He's getting the targets, and I anticipate that he will get success again here. It's a stingy defensive matchup, but Hopkins is the top weapon on this offense, and you do not sit your studs, especially at this point in time in the season. For the Giants, honestly, you can make the case that you don't start anybody here versus the Cardinals. It's a plus matchup, but if it's Colt McCoy under center again, I would be very hesitant here for New York and looking at even Shepard. The only reason I have Shepard as a start would be if Daniel Jones plays, because this offense then does get some firepower back, and I would even potentially play Darius Slayton in that case. But again, if Daniel Jones does not play here, I'm definitely sitting Slayton and Golden Tate. Shepard, is a kind of a borderline type of pick. I probably wouldn't be playing him. You'd be playing him mostly for the potential volume and the usage. But to me, that's still not enough high upside with Colt McCoy under center. So your probably best bet is to fade him as well. And then Christian Kirk again versus the stingy Giants defense. He's been a little bit too boom or bust all season long for my liking, so I am fading him here. Afterwards, Cowboys at the Bengals. And I think this might be a situation where we see two fantasy relevant wide receivers for the Cowboys. One of those rare moments following the Dak Prescott injury, but this Bengals defense is awful. And Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, I think, are your top bets here because I expect Ezekiel Elliott to also be very involved. So I'm not including 3 Cowboys wide receivers here. That would be way too risky. Then for the Bengals, also a decent matchup. Tyler Boyd, not nearly as good of a play as Amari Cooper. And, CeeDee Lamb a little bit risky, but I do like the upside. But Boyd is that preferred option for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think you could view him as a low-end wide receiver too. I wouldn't get too cute here with Higgins or AJ Green. I do think the Bengals might also give it a go more so with the rushing attack here. And for that reason, Higgins, Green sits, and then same with Michael Gallup. Afterwards, we've got the Colts at the Raiders. And for the Colts, T.Y. Hilton has been on a nice little streak these last 2 games. The Raiders defense, not the worst matchup. So you could go and start T.Y. Hilton here, but don't expect that huge type of performance like we saw this last week. In my opinion, to some extent, he is still kind of touchdown dependent. I view him in that low-end wide receiver 2 category, kind of at best. Michael Pittman Jr. also worth a start. He's still getting good amount of targets and capitalizing on those, so maybe your PPR option as far as this offense is concerned. Then for the Raiders, Nelson Aguilar. Yes, he didn't put up huge numbers, but after Darren Waller, Nelson Aguilar got crazy amount of targets last week. They didn't translate to all the success, but I like his chances here. To me, he is the main wide receiver worth playing fantasy-wise for the Raiders. I view him also as a low-end wide receiver too. And afterwards, that leaves Ruggs, Hunter Renfrow way too inconsistent and kind of behind Darren Waller as well as sits. Same with Zach Pascal, who is that third man for the Colts. Next up, we've got the Jets at the Seahawks. Jamison Crowder, Brashad Perriman, good starts here. Crowder, a good example last week of you not sitting your studs even when they have been struggling. He did have some touchdown success. I'm not sure whether that touchdown success will be duplicated, but there is high upside for big yardage here versus the Seattle Seahawks secondary. So I like him and Brashad Perriman. I would rank Crowder higher in PPR scoring. I view him as a solid mid-level wide receiver 2. Then for Seattle, you have to love DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett here. Metcalf is the safer, more solid play because he has a much higher floor. But Tyler Lockett, if there was a game where he has the classic Tyler Lockett, 40-point fantasy performance, it would be versus the Jets. So I really like him here as well. And then afterwards, I would sit Denzel Mims. I don't think this Jets offense can sustain 3 fantasy relevant wide receivers. To me, he is the odd man out after Crowder and Perriman. Following this, we've got the Packers at the Lions. I'm only looking at one Packer wide receiver here. That is Devontae Adams. Yes, you might be saying, what about Allen Lazard? He's been, good since his return, but this is going to be a game, make no mistake about it, where the Packers focus more so on the rush versus the Lions, who have been atrocious in that category. So I really do believe that the Packers and Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, will be the storyline here, but obviously you can't sit Devontae Adams. He's arguably the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy every single week. So you start him, but I think starting any more wide receivers for Green Bay is getting a little bit too cute. So I'm sitting them here just because of the game flow and the matchup in this situation. But for the Lions, I don't expect Kenny Golladay to play at this point in time. Whether it's the hip, whether it's contract negotiations, go figure. But I'm anticipating they finish the season without him. Marvin Jones, big beneficiary because of this. Also, Danny Amendola kind of returning and getting some of those targets. I think he's the better PPR play. Kind of safe in that perspective. Marvin Jones, if he continues to get the targets, though, he's also a very nice play, but more so that standard type of wide receiver. I like both those guys this week. Following this, we've got the Falcons at the Chargers. I think this could be a very high-scoring affair, and I love all the wide receivers here. Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, obviously, in my opinion, top 10 wide receivers, wide receiver ones on the week. But if you need a flyer, look out for Russell Gage. If there was ever a week for this Falcons offense and Matt Ryan to explode, it would be versus the Chargers, and Gage could be a beneficiary of this, so I would take a flyer on him. He has got big upside in this game, and I would say a relatively high floor as well. For the Chargers, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. I love Keenan Allen. Yes, Austin Eckler returning has taken away targets from Mike Williams, but same situation here. The Chargers versus this Falcons defense will have to air it out, and I like Mike Williams, the touchdown upside there. Afterwards, Washington at the 49ers. For Washington, only one wide receiver I'm interested in. Terry McLaurin, yes, he's coming off arguably his worst performance of the year, but I anticipate a bounce back. Some people might try and chase the points with Cam Sims, but again, I don't think that this offense can sustain two fantasy-relevant wide receivers, and if I'm betting my money on someone, it would be Terry McLaurin. Then for the 49ers, Brendan Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, I think both solid plays. I view Brendan Ayuk as the better option. And now, for what it's worth, this is a very tough matchup versus this great Washington defense. So I would temper my expectations for both these guys. Probably low-end wide receiver 2s, but maybe high-end wide receiver 3s is a little bit more accurate. And then Kendrick Bourne is that odd man out, so I would be sitting him. Next up, we got the Saints at the Eagles. Only one wide receiver that I remotely want to look at here. That is Michael Thomas. He's been the main target for Taysom Hill, and I don't think that will change this week. I don't want to gamble with Emmanuel Sanders. I think you're going to see, again, Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, and with Taysom Hill throwing the football versus, an Eagles defense that's better than that of the Atlanta Falcons, I would not risk it with Emmanuel Sanders. And with Jalen Hurts, now the new named quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, I don't want to start a single one of these wide receivers for Philadelphia. If you're forcing me to go with one, it would probably be Greg Ward, just because of what we saw in terms of chemistry from Ward and Hurts when Hurts was in that game last week. But honestly, I think Hurts hurts the value, funny enough, for all of these fantasy options from the running back to the wide receivers. And this Saints defense is no joke versus a rookie quarterback, so I am fading pretty much everyone for the Eagles this week. Next up, we've got the Steelers at the Bills. I like Deontay Johnson. He's pretty much a wide receiver one every single week. He's become the wide receiver one for the Steelers. Tough for Juju Smith-Schuster owners, but hey, at least he's getting the targets, so he's somewhat of a decent play in PPR leagues. That's why I kind of have him here as a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 if we're lucky and we get a touchdown. Then for the Bills, very tough matchup. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, but Diggs and Cole Beasley, assuming John Brown doesn't play again, are solid plays. The targets have to go somewhere, and these will be the two main guys, but still, you kind of devalue them for the week. I think probably in the low-end wide receiver 2 category. Then for the Steelers, Chase Claypool, I think, will be the odd man out here. He's kind of been that big play guy, but versus this Bills team that's kind of also struggled defending the run, I could see, if James Conner returns, a focus on him and, Chase Claypool not being involved as much. It'll happen to one of these, two wide receivers in either Juju or Chase Claypool. Deontay Johnson is safe at this point, but I think Claypool will be that guy this week. Then we've got the Ravens at the Browns. And here, I guess I'll take a chance on Willie Snead. Preferably, I wouldn't be playing any of these wide receivers for the Baltimore Ravens. Marquise Brown has had some success versus the Browns. His first game of the year, he, did put up decent numbers, but I've been saying it all year long. He's way too boom or bust. And if many of you are in your fantasy playoffs right now, depending on the setup in your leagues, do you really want to risk it with Marquise Brown? I would be a little bit more careful and have him as a sit. For the Browns, probably your best option, Jarvis Landry here, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. He's had 2 very nice weeks, but the Browns historically have struggled versus the Baltimore Ravens, who are getting healthier defensively, so keep an eye out for that. But still, he's the best wide receiver to play here. I would put him in the low-end wide receiver 2 category in PPR scoring, which means Rashard Higgins and DPJ are fades to me. I think Baker Mayfield will come back down to earth in this game. So with that, we wrap up our Week 14 wide receiver start and sit breakdown. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other start or sit questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us on there as the week progresses. We'll make sure to answer your questions there as well. And also check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. Sign up for a free newsletter to get access to exclusive content. All the details in the description. But for now, we'll see you guys in future videos.